You're listening to Served Up, a podcast that features inspiring beverage professionals and topic experts that share their passions through meaningful conversations. I'm your host, Bridget Albert, also known as a Market Fresh Mixologist, an industry mentor with decades of experience. Grab a cocktail and sit back. Let's learn how we can make a positive impact in our industry. Hey y'all, it's Bridget here. My guest host, Jessica Baldo-Reggio, and I had the chance to chat with John Hamel. John is the director of wine growing at Hamel Family Wines, where he leads with a focus on organic, biodynamic, and low intervention practices. His journey began outside the wine world, studying journalism and working in organic farming before formally training and making wine at UC Davis. Influenced by conversations with producers, he became deeply committed to dry farming and expressing true terroir through his wines. Today, he crafts elegant, precise wines that reflect the volcanic soils and natural energy of Sonoma Valley. So sit back, relax, grab yourself your favorite glass of Hamel Family Wines, and enjoy the show.
John, welcome. Good afternoon, and welcome to the podcast. Bridget and I are excited you're here with us today.
Yeah, it's still morning where I am, but I'm happy to be with you guys today.
Nice. Awesome. Greetings from Sonoma, right?
Yeah, greetings from Sonoma.
Okay, so we can't wait for you to share with our listeners a little bit of your background, how you got to where you are today, 15 years in winemaking, and share with us your story of your family's vineyard.
Yeah. So I'll start from the very beginning. So my family started making a little bit of wine in 2006. I was in college at the time, and they were doing it in Sonoma Valley and kind of the northern end of the valley in the town called Kenwood. I graduated from college in 2009. I had a journalism degree, was not at all ever considering joining the wine industry, but I'd gotten really into cooking in college and kind of into like organic produce. It was right around the time where I think there was a little bit of a resurgence in kind of the, farm to table concept. And I really wanted to understand. I thought, I loved cooking, but I wanted to also like understand getting the right ingredients. So I decided after I graduated, I wanted to move on to a farm, an organic farm. And it just so happened that the one place I was able to kind of find to work was on Mount Veeder, so not too far away from where I grew up, and it was not a vineyard, just kind of an organic produce farm, small. And for kind of like the first 3 months out of college, that's what I did. And after not really finding that to be the most lucrative way to live, I started to look for a kind of a job. And I just, I knew a little bit about what my parents were doing. I knew about their vineyard. I was just coming off of a farm. I had a journalism degree. And so I was able to get a job doing for a public relations firm, kind of entry level position for a firm that represented a lot of like kind of cultier Cabernet projects in Napa Valley. And so being a college graduate, not having tasted a lot of wine in my life, wine was kind of around the dinner table for me, but I would enjoy it, but I never really like intellectually was thinking that much about kind of, about it when I would have it with meals. But I think kind of the unique segue of going from an organic farm to basically having to visit all these vineyards, learn how they were farming, very precise, like no expenses spared thing. I became really fascinated with kind of, I think the number of variables, decisions that people would have to make and why they were doing things. And then understanding everything after that, the winemaking. And again, there's so many different ways people were doing things. It really like started to fascinate me. And I started to try a lot more wine as part of my job. And then it became more interested in what my parents were doing, the little bit of wine that they were making. So I started asking my dad a lot about, how he was farming, and he would start to include me. They had a winemaking consultant that was making the wines, and kind of on blending trials and stuff like that, he would include me in it. I think my dad had some, deranged notion that a family wine business could be some kind of retirement for him at some point. And he saw my interest and maybe thought about someone that could help do a lot of the work. And I think he'd been making wine without a clear idea of, how he was going to sell it and all that. So he more or less asked me if wanted to grow kind of this into a family business, what he had been doing. And, at the time I'm very much a person that is kind of like a mile deep, an inch wide, an attention span. I was fully into understanding wines, and I thought it was going to be unique. It'd be, interesting working with my family, but an incredible opportunity. So 2010, I joined, and I was kind of employee number one. And kind of things have grown quite a bit since then. I think just kind of breaking up like the two different eras for me personally working in the business. The first was, I think, working under a winemaking consultant and with a vineyard management company where I really it was, my education, in a real way. And that was kind of a 6-year period from 2010 to 2016. I think kind of by 2017, my parents thought I'd earned the opportunity to start to manage the vineyards and make the wines. And I was kind of at a weird crossroads because by that time, I was drinking at home a lot of European wines. And I thought, the wines that we were making were, by commercial standards, good California, kind of more modern style, very, I would say, referential to what was happening in Napa at the time. There were wines that were commercially well made, but I found kind of a dissonance in what I loved drinking at home and what we were making. And I started to think about what was it that I loved in a lot of the European wines I was drinking, and why weren't we seeing that kind of in the wines we were making? I think it's more complicated than just one thing, but I think one of the crucial elements in terms of like a dimension that was missing from our own wines was what I would call minerality. So an energy coming from the soil that is not acidity, but it really is the signature of terroir expression. I think there's other things that go into terroir expression. The climate's important, all of that. But I think in terms of like the most tangible and I would say evocative element of what terroir is with wine for me is minerality. And I felt like the wines we were making were kind of grazing or glimpsing that, but not connected to it in a meaningful way. I would say, just looking more broadly at kind of New World wines, I would say that's kind of generally the case. And so I started to think about, okay, I think there's obviously great examples from the New World of wines that are benchmarks that are super mineral, great wines. So I'm not saying every wine in the New World is like that, but I would say it's more the exception than it is the rule. And I think we were very much not in the exception category. We were making wines that, looking backwards, I don't think meaningfully connected to the place and weren't expressing that place. It was a bigger issue, and there was no easy pathway to how do you make wines that express terroir more meaningfully. There's no playbook that I knew about at the time for that. I think there's so much coincidence in life that is so important, but around that time, heard on a podcast, I heard a terroir specialist named Pedro Parra, who I'd never heard of before. But it was right around the time where I was very open to wanting to understand why, terroir, why our wines were not showing that in a real way, why certain wines do show that in a real way. And so I was interested in just hearing what this person had to say. Pedro Parra, for people that may not know the name. He is kind of a household name, I'd say, for sommeliers and a lot of people in the trade. Was not a household name for me at the time, but he has a PhD in terroir. He got that in France. He's a Chilean, and he's really made his career about understanding the connection between soil and quality and character of wine. He now, consults for Domaine Rouleau and Meursault, Ligier Belair and Von Romane, Biondi Santi and Montalcino. I mean, it's like kind of reference point regions, some of the top producers. And so I think he's really has a lot of value that I think a lot of people look for. And I think sommeliers always want to understand the connection between soil and wine in a greater capacity. And I think winemakers do as well. So like he's got this unique niche knowledge that I think a lot of people have interest in. Anyways, so I heard him speak for about an hour on that podcast, I'll Drink to That, with Levi Dalton. And I was just floored with what he had to say. He articulated clearer than anyone that I'd ever heard the connection between, pretty much clay, what it is a wine, silt, what it is a wine, sand, stone, limestone versus granite versus, I mean, everything he had to say were just like all these questions that had kind of been percolating up for me. And I realized like this person might help me understand our terroir better. And I think one piece of it is understanding the terroir. The next piece is connecting to it in a meaningful way. So I feel like he could have been the person to really help us make that leap. Yeah. So I reached out to him. I asked him if he worked in California. He said he had, the earliest parts of his career as a consultant, worked for Benziger in Sonoma Valley, which is not far away from us. He had great memories of the area, but knew that the terroir was really difficult and had kind of moved on from California. I think was generally skeptical of wines being made from California for a lot of the same reasons that I was kind of becoming a little bit, I think, just dissatisfied with our ability to just make wines that were more evocative and expressive of place. So he agreed to come meet me, and we had a great connection. His personality, we both have a passion for wine, and it was an instant kind of connection personality wise. But I think for him, his reference point for, I think, North Star for terroir expression was framed in Burgundy, which, if you think about it, is a really non-democratic concept. Like you have this huge slope where certain parts of that slope make wines of a certain quality, where if you go down the hill or up the hill, you start to get away from that quality. So if you just so happen to have holdings in Grand Cru or Premier Cru, I mean, life is great and your ceiling for quality is huge. But if you're, lower elevation, more appellation or village level, it's a different reality, and your ceiling is lower, no matter how good of a grape grower you are, winemaker. So it's very much the soil determines the capacity for quality. And I think he needed to see that what we had wasn't all bad capacity to make good wines. And I just so happen to, luckily we have good terroir, we have bad terroir. And I just happened to be very lucky in showing him what is some of our best terroir. So convinced him that we have the capacity to make something very, I would say, evocative from volcanic terroir. And there's a lot in volcanic terroir that has a very low qualitative capacity. So we're lucky we have something that does have the capacity to make something that has a lot of character, minerality, complexity, and nuance. And I was lucky enough to show him that, basically.
That's amazing. I would like to take it back just a little bit, John, before we just dive into the flavor profiles of your wine, kind of back to the beginning. And you mentioned, that your parents were the ones that formed Hamel Wines. Yeah.
Yep.
Did they come from a wine growing background? Were they already farmers? Can you kind of paint the picture, the history of how really your brand was born?
Yeah. So my parents had developed a passion for wine And really, I think more or less had been based in the Bay Area. And at a certain point, I think wanted to get into a slower pace of life. And they looked for a home up in Sonoma Valley and kind of, I think the two things, them wanting that transition for kind of like the end of their career in life. And I think having a passion for wine made them interested in starting to grow grapes on an acre, basically. And they were not, no, this is not like a fourth generation kind of, like we didn't have, my family didn't have the land, didn't have vineyard at the time. So it was really kind of a passion project that I think, more or less was inspired just by having a passion for drinking wine and being in an area where you could grow grapes.
Yeah. I think that's really cool, especially if that's something that they wanted to do, get out of their careers, right? To pursue something that excites them. It really takes a lot of guts and to be bold, to do something, like that. Have you learned any lessons from your parents? Any good ones? And start with the good ones, and any ones that you're like, holy shit, I just wouldn't do that.
Right. I've learned a lot of great lessons. I mean, I think working with your family and especially both my parents were at the tail end of their career. And I think it really, like, in a way, it's a side of them that I'd never, being in a family is different than being in a business with your family. And I'd never really seen who they were as business people. So I learned a lot, and I still continue to learn a lot from them in that capacity. And I think there's like you just see a different side to people when they're in a more professional context, or you're making decisions that are different than the context you'd make decisions as a family just in normal life. So that's been really, really interesting. I think they have, I think at a certain point they kind of let go a little bit of, I think in a way they were able to let go and allow me the kind of freedom to progress the project. And that's really difficult to do. I think like having trust in someone and being able to take your hand off the steering wheel and allow someone else that you have faith in to kind of take things over or move things ahead, is sometimes difficult to do. And I think there's a number of generational wineries where the second generation or, the son or daughter of the parents is afraid to change things, right? They just want to always do things, and they're always kind of in the shadow of the success of their parents. And it's really constrictive. And I have the opposite environment and have been fortunate to be, I think I had to earn, I had to do 6 years working under people to be able to earn the opportunity to start to make the decision myself. It wasn't just, here's the keys to everything. But I think they have allowed me to progress. And I think very much like we're at a point where even, I guess, 9 years after I took over the winemaking, it still feels like our best expression is still ahead of us, and we're still working towards that. So it's like, to be able to be in a place where you can continue to get better and not just replicate the same thing the way it was always done
that's amazing.
It's special.
They must have like so much confidence in you, right? And what
rightly
you
or
can bring
wrongly,
to the
yes.
wines. Rightly or wrongly, John, you are steering the ship. But no, it sounds like you're doing just incredible things. But I think it's really cool that your parents have that trust in you to be innovative, to think outside the box, to bring in, like you said, an expert to give opinions. My family personally, not in wine at all. We own a microbrewery, right?
Okay.
And so I just see a lot of, I don't know, the lessons. There's just so many lessons. Our daughter's working right now at our brewery, like for the summer. Even just with that, it's like, she comes home and she's like, I learned how to mash in today, or, whatever it is. Right.
Yeah.
And there's just so much that we can always take away from our parents, but then add to. And I think when you are creating a legacy like you are, it's really important to keep those lessons at the forefront and to talk about them, because others will learn from you, John, which is wonderful.
Yeah. 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 And I think what's important to honestly in the family business to be successful is to have a lot of stakeholders that are not family as well, that are important people and that are really contributing in a meaningful way. And we have that balance, fortunately, in kind of the team makeup here as well.
John, I'm curious about, speaking of your parents, are you the only child? Was there pressure from them? Like, it's all you, John, or
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
have no more Hamel Vineyards.
So I have three siblings. All have worked at some point at the winery. Two more in a like way where it was never going to be the thing that they did for their lives. So it was more just we had some projects that they could help out with, and they were at a point in their life where it made sense. And then I had a brother who actually from 2012 to 2022 worked at the winery, and he's very much kind of a gregarious, can light up a room with his personality person, was great on the commercial side of things. I'm like naturally an introvert. I love talking about our wines because I know everything that we're doing and I have a passion for that. And it's easy for me to just like, I'm not, but he is in a way kind of just, he has the classic salesman personality, not in a way that's like pushy, but just like everyone, enjoys his company. And he really sees people and makes friends, with almost anyone. So he was involved from 2012, 2022. And I think at the end of the day, his he had a passion for wine, but maybe wanted to do other things in his life and not feel like the burden or the anchor to the family business. And so he's moved on, and I miss him and I love the time that I had with him. But he's kind of the one that was seriously here for a good while. And he's my older brother. Yeah.
Amazing. Can you share a bit about your wines? What can we expect from them?
Yeah. So I think, Bridget, like kind of where I left things with Pedro. I mean, we've worked with him for the past 9 years. And where we are as a volcanic hillside, most of our vineyards are kind of dominated by old lava flow as the basis for the soil. And so a lot of like the work with him has been really just like in the same way they've done in Burgundy, like understanding where the soils change, and what those soil changes mean for the quality and the character of the wine. And when you start to dissect anything like that, you start to see where you get wines that have character, and where you maybe make wines that are easy and enjoyable, but maybe don't have the depth of other places. So I think kind of the first, the first question I had, like, why weren't we getting minerality, and where is it, where does it live in terms of like a volcanic soil system? So I think what we found was generally, and it's very simple almost, like, but the stonier the soil, the more tension, verticality, depth, character you get. And the more you have the decomposed version of that rock, so that rock broken down into clay, silt, you get something that's easy, generous, but is not at the end of the day delivering the same amount of like depth and complexity. And I think it doesn't have the same frequency of minerality to it. So I think kind of the first part of the process was just breaking out everything so we could see the character. And when we started to understand, okay, this is where we see complexity, minerality, obviously we start focusing more on those areas in terms of generally those blocks will make our top wines. But also as we develop vineyard, it's like now we know where we have the soil that makes the style of wine that we want. I think the other thing, like beyond understanding your terroir, like you need to understand a terroir before you can express it. But like my job as winemaker is how do you connect to that meaningfully? And I think a big like thing happened to me a year before I met Pedro. I was in Champagne, had a visit at Domaine Jacques Solos, which was, to this day, I don't know how I got that visit, but incredible 2 hours with Anselm Solos. And at the end of it, he asked me if we irrigated our vineyard. I said we did. And he said, you might as well have a bunch of potted plants in a field because that's as close as you'll ever come to expressing the terroir. So again, right around the time where I was very receptive to wanting to understand why our terroir expression was not at the level of what I'd say the benchmark wines of the world are. There's a harsh comment to hear, hard to hear that pretty much someone that you idolize thinks that none of the wine you're making has the capacity to express the terroir. But I came back to California, and a year later, I'm with Pedro, and a lot of the work is digging a lot of soil pits. So I had a great opportunity to look at what our root systems were doing in our blocks, which were irrigated. And in general, Bridget, what I saw were root systems about 3 feet deep and roots going sideways predominantly. And at the same time, Pedro's, in that same soil pit talking about what's happening at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 feet. And I'm thinking, if the roots aren't actually touching any of that, how is that ever going to make its way into the glass of wine? And so I realized we weren't necessarily looking at potted plants, but we were kind of like looking at potted plants in a way, really restricted, superficially root systems that at the end of the day were inhabiting the least interesting part of the soil pit that we were looking at. And so I realized, if we are going to be serious about terroir expression, irrigation does look like it's a problem. And I started to ask around. There's not many people that are actively dry farming. There are a lot of old vineyards that are dry farmed and were established a long time ago, but like producers that are planting vineyard today to be dry farmed, it's a smaller subset. And for me, the top of that group is kind of like qualitatively and just track record is Dominus. And I've had the contact information for the technical director there, and I reached out to him, and he was super generous, spent a Saturday with me, basically walking me through the important facets of dry farming. And so that was 2016. I met Todd Mostero. He's continued to be a huge mentor for me just in terms of all things wine growing, but, very importantly on dry farming. Yeah, I was super inspired. 2017, we were able to dry farm about 20% of our vineyard that first year. Now we're at about 80%. And basically the way in our climate to dry farm is when you don't get rain from mid-May till, pretty much October, which is the core part of the growing season, the only way you can be successful dry farming is if you have deep roots, right? Because you have vines that have the capacity to find moisture late in the season when there isn't anything coming out of the sky. And in a weird way, root depth correlates with quality. People always talk about older vines make better wine. Why is that? I mean, it's basically deep proliferated roots. Younger vines make worse quality wine, and the reason is they're superficially connected to the soil. So the more you push the plant to have deep roots, the more you get depth with the wines, the more you see minerality. So I think 2 things have been important for the style of wine we make. One, understanding our place and understanding what we want with our wines. We want to make wines that have energy and minerality. We want wines that show the place. Well, we're in a warmer climate, and in California, dry climate. So that you can easily go towards something that can be too hot, too ripe. So a lot of how we farm is really about how do you create an elegant expression in that context. And we've been farming biodynamically for about the past 10 years. That's really helped us. I think once you get balance with the plants in the vineyard, you really see balance with the fruit. I think dry farming has given us the capacity to, I think, show the terroir in a real way. And so I think the style of wine we make is really based on, I think very like minimal intervention, not irrigation, more natural inputs with dry farming. And then once you're able to do that well, the wines make themselves pretty seamlessly. And we, are able to be kind of like low touch in the winery. And at the same time, I think when you understand your terroir and you want to show that, a lot of the choices in the winemaking are really kind of about less is more, right? Like if you want to show a volcanic hillside as the expression, new oak, which tastes, the same here as it does in France, as it does in South Africa, anywhere in the world, right? Starts to just make the wine feel less singular and less distinctive to where it's grown. So I think all the choices we make in terms of wine growing, it's really about showing the thing that is most distinctive, the high elevation, volcanic hillside, terroir as the predominant thing, and really having the technique very much behind that.
John, it's amazing to hear you talk about the soil, right? Just all aspects of it, how important it is, right, for winemaking. I had the opportunity to meet Pedro actually last year. And I asked him, I was like, did you play in the dirt as a kid? Like, what is your obsession with the dirt? Mm-hmm. And he just loves it. He loves it. So I guess my question to you is, 8-10 years later, with Pedro's help and your parents, influence, are you good? Like, do you feel good about where you are, where the winery is, or are you still digging and playing in the dirt for like the next cool thing that's going to really impact the wines?
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways, the terroir work, like I would say 90% of the work we've been able to do in terms of understanding the place in the past 9 years, 10 years that I've worked with Pedro. I think part of that, though, has been looking at a lot of fallow areas, Jessica, and saying, okay, this has the capacity to make an interesting wine. And we did a development, a vineyard in 2018 with Pedro, where it's very much all the blocks are based in specific soil areas, and then another one in 2023. So we're already seeing the 2018 wine planted vineyard and the wines from that, which are incredible and are just, only going to become more interesting as the vines mature. And then the 2023, planting is in some of our best terroir that was fallow at the time, so we'll still see those wines and the expression of those. And we have an idea of what they'll be, but, very much it's very loose and I'm excited to see those. I think the other kind of component that has become really interesting and I would say fascinating for us as kind of like a wine growing team. I think the 2023 vintage here was very unusual by California standards. So it was a year where we got almost twice as much rainfall as what we'd normally get. So a little under 60 inches of rain, and very, very cool season. So almost like a European season in California. And what was incredible is I think after July, we never saw a day over 95 degrees. So it was this beautiful thing where normally we get about 13 days in August and September that are at 95 or above. So we usually get late season, heat events, and we're used to those. But when you take away that element, we were able to see how the grapes mature. And there's just this character with the 2023's wines that aromatically super haunting, like beautiful aromatics. And the wines are just so, in a way, light, but kind of powerful at the same time. They're just very long, persistent. And I think we learned a couple things from that vintage. I think sometimes, when you like less can be more, even with the structure of the wine, when you have maybe, lighter extraction, everything like that, you can show the terroir more clearly and get more energy from the terroir in the wine. So I think we see more complexity in a weird way when we were able to move in a direction that, is making wines very, very in a very light-handed way. The other thing that we saw with that vintage is this like beautiful, and, you can ask the question to anyone, they'll have different reference points for this, but we saw a concept of vitality in the wines that we hadn't seen that level of before. And that's a really abstract concept for a lot of people. But I think like if we went around the room or this interview, I mean, you can talk about wines that you've had in your life that aren't like alive in that, like it's microbial spoilage or something like that, but they convey just something beyond just the classic. There is a life to them. And we saw that a lot in the 2023 vintage, like across the board with the wine. So we're trying to understand, I think, why, what was it about the vintage that buffered that character? And how do we start to try to see that character in years that aren't just this once in a lifetime European vintage that we have in California, right? Like, how do we start to connect the wines in every vintage more meaningfully to that character. We've been certified biodynamic for 10 years, certified organic for 12. It's not like we're new to like farming sustainably. The vineyard's very alive. And so how do you bring that life through the whole process and deliver it in the glass year over year is kind of the thing that we're trying to hone. And I think it's trying to like, how do you find terroir expression? There's a playbook looking backwards on the path that we had, and it worked out for us. But I can't really like divine what that's going to look like for how to find this character. And I think so playing around and trialing different things and being more open in our minds, I think is going to help us try to find this. So I think those are the things that honestly, I'm still just as invigorated coming to work, today as I was in 2017 when it was, the first year I was taking over the
I love that. I love that you still have that excitement and passion after all of these years. A lot of times for folks that might, fade, but it seems to me like you just keep finding new things to keep you excited about wine and growing in general. So with that said, do you have any advice for newbies, for those who are new wine growers, who are those who are new into the industry that you could give? Maybe some lessons that you learned.
Yeah. Lessons that I've learned, super important thing. I kind of did it backwards. I became more savvy with the winemaking side before the vineyard side. And I think that's the wrong way to do it. I think you should start in the vineyard and then have learn the winemaking as the extension of that. So it just meant I had to, when I took over kind of the winemaking and the vineyard management, I felt really comfortable in the winery and I felt like very insecure in the vineyard. And I think to be a complete person, you need to know both. Even if you end up just becoming a winemaker, you just become a viticulturalist, like you want to grow grapes to make the wines of whatever, whatever winery you're working for, whatever the ambition is, you want to be able to meet that. And same on the winemaking side. So I think super important to master both things, regardless of where you end up. I think I can talk for a long time about the differences between dry farming and irrigation and why I value dry farming. But I do think people need to not everyone abandon irrigation, but be more thoughtful about why, when, and how much water they're giving to the vineyard. And I think, we're in a really fortunate position that a lot of people aren't in the California wine industry. It's very much a grape grower grows the grapes and sells the grapes to the winery kind of model for most of the wine that's made. There are a lot of estate models that grow their own grapes and make the wine from that. We're in that latter category. But when you're a grape grower and you're selling the grapes and you're paid by weight, there's no incentive for you to dry farm. It hurts your economics to dry farm. So it's totally reasonable to understand why the landscape in California is based on irrigation. That's a big thing. So I won't pretend that I have the answer to solve that. I think there's ways to get around incenting people to grow grapes in a certain way based on, a higher price per ton or paying by acre and those things. But I think the winery has to value that the quality they get from fruit that is dry farmed is in fact greater than irrigated grapes. And I don't know if most people are there yet. But I hope people just can keep an open mind and realize that vines actually have the capacity to do a lot more than we allow them to. I know for sure there are places, and we have them pockets within our own vineyard where I don't think we'll ever be able to dry farm fully. We'll always have to irrigate. And I think there's a lot of vineyard that was developed in California in areas where you can really only get away with irrigation. So I'm not going to say that everywhere should be dry farmed, but I think people can be a lot more thoughtful in terms of how much water they're giving. And I think ultimately the quality, you get rewarded in quality and you save the environment wins a little bit more. So to me, it's a double incentive to do that. What other advice would I have? wouldn't necessarily say this for everyone, but I think, to always challenge kind of assumptions. I think it's especially important right now. I think the wine industry is seeing some level of kind of contraction and lack an inability to speak and resonate with the next generations of potential wine drinkers. And so I think to do things the way they've always been done is not going to, it's not going to work out well for a lot of people. And I think the more we can explore newer ways of, I think making wine in California, we only have 175 years of kind of wine growing history. There's a huge future ahead of us. And how we bring that to the market and talk about it. And I think we need to evolve every aspect of what we're doing. And I think all of it is in a positive way. Like I think my friends, more millennial age, they drink wine differently than, let's say, my parents' generation. And so that's not to say they don't like wine, but they like it on different terms. And so how do you meet people where they are? And so I think, especially right now, it's important for a lot of people to keep an open mind. At the same time, I think it's very important for people to become a winemaker or viticulturalist. It's not just no education, just go and do it and you'll be better. You need to understand kind of what got us here and the technical basis behind everything. But once you master that stuff, that's when you're able to, I think, really innovate. So I think doing the work is important too. It's like, any chef will tell you how important it is to do, the thousands of hours they spent prepping and all that stuff got them to where they were able to be in a really creative capacity. So all that, it's the same in wine.
Yeah, I love that. I love that comparison.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it is a real thing, right? The whole millennials versus what our parents are drinking and the impact it's making in the wine industry now. John, before we close, what have we not discussed? What should we know about Hamel that we haven't really discussed or gone over? And how are you making an impact and how will it look different, especially for the next generation at Hamel?
Yeah. I think we've covered a good amount. I think, looking ahead, the next generation, like our associate winemaker, myself, our viticulturalist, our enologist, cellar master. I mean, we're all either millennial or approaching Gen Z. Our cellar master and enologist are both like 28 years old. So it's important. We're a very flat tasting team where we taste everything together. We make decisions together. And I think tasting in a vacuum and just thinking you know it all and you're this incredible palate or winemaker is dangerous, and I don't like that personality or that kind of way of approaching things. So I think the more we can, for our team, we have a younger team that's passionate about dry farming, is passionate about biodynamics, adapting biodynamics to our climate, which is not, is very different than Northern Europe, where biodynamics comes from. How do you do that? How do you think about that? What is vitality in wine? Where does it come from? Where does it live? Like these types of questions, we have energy behind wanting to understand these things because the team is young and really, I would say, just ambitious. And it's great to be with a group like that. And at the same time, we also all love wine. So at home, we drink wine and love to see what other people are doing. And so I love the team we have now is great. And I hope it's a very special thing when you get a team that's really just locked in and all in sync. It doesn't happen all the time. It's very hard to get that. And so I think we're at a point where we're 10 years into things, direction. And the next decade, I think, is going to even be more exciting with a team like this. So awesome. Yeah, I don't have anything more to say beyond, I think there's too much, I would say, in our industry of people who make a certain style of wine that they don't like to drink. And when you have a full team that's on board with the direction and wanting to do the work to go in that direction, it's special, and so we feel fortunate to kind of be in that situation.
It's not called a job then, right? You just
right.
You love it.
It's still there's still a lot of work, but it is, yes, there's something beneath it all that, makes it all worth it. Right.
Yeah. And you're surrounded by people who believe in the same thing you're believing. So it's a great day at work. Well, before we go, John, just thank you on behalf of Bridget and myself. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. And thank you for your vision and telling us your story about Hamel Vineyards.
No, thank you guys for the time. It was really nice talking. I hope I didn't, I talked a lot and didn't allow much space for questions, but I hope.
No, it's good. Good. The more we hear from our guests, the better. And, with that, I want to wish you just some great health and a lot of peace, John. Thank you so much for coming on Served Up.
No, thank you guys for the conversation. I really appreciate it.
Amazing. Cheers.
Great to meet you, Bridget. Great to see you, Jessica.
You too. Well, bye.
Take care, guys.
Thanks for listening. Served Up is brought to you by Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits. Produced by Zunu.online. Music by We Killed the Lion can be found on Spotify. Make sure to subscribe to be notified of our future Served Up episodes. Cheers.